Okay, welcome everybody to another class with Web Yeshiva. I'm David Sedley. We are talking about the Shemoneh Esrei, the Amidah, and tonight, we are going to speak about the second uh, second um, s- second bracha, which is the bracha of Gevurot. So before I start on that, I want to say tonight's shiur is dedicated. Is it? Okay. Tonight's shiur is dedicated by Yehudi Feldman in loving memory of his mother Helen Tova Feldman. WebYeshiva. He's dedicated to all the shiurim today or this week in memory of his mother. So may her neshama have an aliyah, and may her son merit long years and lots of merit to support Torah learning. So the bracha of Gevurot is we turn to God in two ways, as a rain god, the god of nature, the god who brings rain, and as a God who resurrects the dead. Now, both rain and resurrection are forms of reward, if you like, for doing the mitzvot. So I want to talk about the relationship between rain and resurrection, why they're fundamental to our belief and to our prayers, and to try perhaps to answer why it's so central to the Amidah. In other words, we can agree that the belief in the resurrection of the dead is a fundamental, one of the 13 principles of faith. But that doesn't explain why it is the second most important of all the 19 blessings in Shemoneh Esrei. So I'm not sure I have a good answer, but I'm going to attempt an answer to that question. Now, just to be clear, this is not a blessing where we're asking God to provide rain. That comes later in Birkat HaShanim. This blessing of Gevurot is praising God, not asking for anything. The first three blessings we don't ask. We're praising God as the rain giver, right? Or in the summer as the dew giver, in the winter as the rain giver, and always as the resurrector of the dead. So here are the words of the blessing, which I'm sure you know. Atah gibor le'olam, Adonai mechei metim atarav loshia. You are mighty, and that's why it's called Gevurot, this blessing, because it's Gevurah. You are mighty forever, God. Mechei metim, you resurrect the dead. Rav loshia, powerful to save. We then say, depending summer, winter, Morid Hatal, or Mashiv Haroch, or Morid HaGeshem. Well, outside Israel, we don't say Morid Hatal. Well, no, I'll rephrase that. Nusach Ashkenaz outside Israel does not say Morid Hatal. Nusach Sfarad does. Inside Israel, everybody does. I think most Sfarad traditions also, they say, I think, Mashiv Haroch or Morid Hatal in the summer. Anyway, we distinguish summer, winter, but again, we're not asking God for rain. We're just describing this is the action that God does at this time of year. We continue. God sustains life with chesed, resurrects the dead with rachamim, somech noflim, supports the fallen, rofeh cholim, heals the sick, matir asurim, frees the bound, mekayem emunato lishenei afar, and he keeps his faith with those who sleep in the dust. Whenever I hear somebody davening for the Amun, they say lishnei afar. It's the two dusts. It's lishenei, those who sleep in the dust. Mi chamocha bal Gevurot, who is like you, the master of Gevurah, of strength. Omi dai melech, melech me'imit u'mechayim atzmich shua, who is like you, king who kills and brings to life and flourishes salvation. V'ne'eman ata l'chayat metim, you are faithful to restore the dead. Baruch atah Hashem mechayim metim, blessed are you who resurrects the dead. Those are the words of the blessing. So why is it called Gevurot? Why do we call this blessing Gevurot? Now, the truth is Tosfot says because it starts with the word Atah Kippur, right? And that's why we call it Gevurot. But the Tosfot says that in answer to the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, before I get to the Gemara, I want to quote Chief Rabbi Hertz, who describes this bracha in general, where we're praising the God of nature. He says, the appeal to history, the peculiar sphere of God's revelation, is now reinforced by that was the first blessing, right? The God of the patriarchs is now reinforced by an appeal to nature as displaying the power and goodness of God. From the distant past, the worshipper turns to the distant future and hails God as the King, who alone is mighty to save. The God of the past and future is also the God who lovingly sustains the living in all the vicissitudes of earthly existence, and whose infinite faithfulness remembers and redeems them that sleep in the dust. So apologies for the typos. I wrote that very quickly. I copied that very quickly. So he understands this is a blessing about nature, which it is, but also the resurrection of the dead is the ultimate in unnatural, in a sense, the ultimate miracle. So it's both the God of nature and the God of supernatural, above, beyond nature. The Mishnah in Tanit refers to this blessing as Gevurot. Me'ematai mazkirin Gevurot Gishamim. Well, that's not quite true. Refers to Gevurot Gishamim. When do we begin mentioning the strength or the Gevurah, the heroism, the might of the rain? Rabbi Eliezer Omer Miyom Tov Rishon Shel Chag. So Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shua disagree. Rabbi Eliezer says we start praying for rain on the first day, not praying for, mentioning that God provides rain on the first day of Sukkot. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Miyom Tov Achron Shel Chag. Rabbi Yeshua says from the last day of Sukkot, and in fact we follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua. We always follow the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua against Rabbi Eliezer. So we start saying on Simchat Torah Shmini Atzeret. And the Gemara discusses why it really should be the first day, but we don't want rain during Sukkot. But anyway, so the Gemara asks on the Mishnah, Litnei me'ematai maskirin et gshamim? Why doesn't the Mishnah just say, when do we mention rain? My Gevurot Gishamim. Why is it the strength, the might of the rain? Am Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mipnei shiradin begvurah, because rain falls with strength. Shenemar oseh gedolot ein cheker v'niflot ad ein mispar. God does great things, infinite great things and infinite wonders. Now, what's that got to do with rain or Gevurah? Unclear. Uchtiv hanoten matar al pnei haaretz v'shalech mayim al pnei chutzot. God brings rain on the earth and sends water to the fields. So the Gemara learns here, my mashma, what does this mean? What's the connection? So the word cheker appears in both verses. Comprehension? Okay, fine. So we connect the rain in the second verse to the creation in the first verse, and therefore this is a blessing where appeal to God as God of creation, meaning God of nature, as Hertz would say. It says here in the first verse, God does infinite wonders beyond. I don't like the word comprehension, Mr. English translation of Stein. So okay. There's no comprehension to God's wisdom. So God creates the mountains, and now we have the word Gevurah. That's how we get to Gevurot Geshamim. And how do we know that we acknowledge God's might, the God of creation and rain, might in prayer? To Tanya, because it's taught in a Braita, to love God and to serve Him with all your heart. Now, what does that mean to serve? To work for God in your heart? What kind of work, service is there in the heart? You must say this is prayer. Ochtiv Batre, and it says after that, V'natati matar etzachem be'ito yorem al kosh, I will bring rain to your land, the first rain, the later rain. So therefore, it says, Lavdo b'chol levavchem, and natati matar. So we're supposed to pray for rain from that juxtaposition. The prayer for rain, and again, I don't want to conflate this with the bracha for prosperity, which is going to come later. I'll talk more about rain there. But fundamentally, the creation of humanity is a creation so that we can pray for rain. Chapter 2 of Bereshit, we had the 7 days of creation. We had God creating on day 4 the plants. However, in chapter 2, it says, there was not yet any plants on the earth. The grass of the field had not yet sprouted. Because God had not made it rain on the earth. And there was no person to work the earth. So even though chapter 1 talks about the creation of plants and trees and grasses, chapter 2 says that in fact was only a potential creation. The actual creation hasn't happened because there's no humans around. Says the Gemara in Cholin, Ravasi Rami. So Ravasi pointed out this contradiction between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. K'tiv, it says, V'tatzeha aretz desha, B'tlat b'shabta. I'm sorry. So the ground will bring forth grass, and that's on the 3rd day of. I'm sorry, the 4th day was sun and moon. 3rd day of creation. Uchtiv, and it says in chapter 2, Kol siach hasadeh terem yeh ba'aretz. So this grass had not yet sprouted. But Male Shabta, and that is on Friday. So how can it grow on Tuesday and not be there on Friday? Melamed shiatzu d'shaim v'amdu al petach karka. This teaches that the grass grew, but just waited at the surface of the earth, ad sheba Adam harishon, until Adam was created, or bikesh alehem rachamim, and requested mercy, prayed for the grass. V'yadu kishamim, and then the rain fell, v'tzamchu, and they sprouted. Lelamedcha she'akadosh baruch hu mitaveh letfilatan shel tzadikim. This teaches that God desires the prayers of the righteous. So had there not been had there not been a need for rain, had we not had well, it's all a circle, isn't it? The purpose of creation was so that Adam could pray for rain, for the plants to grow. Had he not been created, there would have been no purpose at all of creation. And the reason God didn't just make the grass already grown without rain is because God wants our prayers. The reason the world is designed in such a way that without rain we have a drought and no plants is because God wants us to pray. So at essence, the prayer for rain is the most fundamental prayer that we have. This precedes Brit Avot, precedes the covenant with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. This goes beyond a special connection God has with the Jewish people. This is Adam Rishon. The prayer for rain is the most fundamental definition of what it means to be human. Somebody who prays. The Gemara in Bava Kama, as you know, talks about the Arba Avod Mazik and the 4 primary damaging agents. And one of them, the Mishnah calls Mav'eh. And the Gemara on Gimel Amud Bet says, "My Maveh, what is Maveh?" And Rav says that is Adam, and he brings the verse where the word Maveh is used to mean praying, to ask for things. So a person is defined as a praying being. Shmuel disagrees and says Maveh means an animal eating. He brings a different verse, but fundamentally, the creation of Adam and Eve was so that they could pray for the grass that they need to live, because in the Garden of Eden, they only had the plants to eat. So that's why we have this cycle or connection of prayer and rain and nature. And then there was an example that not only Adam Harishon, but even more later rabbis, Rav Nachman bar Papa, Havyanei Hahi Ginta. So Rav Nachman had a little garden. Shadi Bei Bizrani, and he planted seeds, V'lo tzamach, but they didn't sprout. By Rachame, so he prayed. Ata Mitra, the rain came, V'tzamach, and then they sprouted. Amar Hainu Ravasi, so that supports Ravasi's statement that we just read before, that God only makes plants sprout if we pray for the rain, if we care about them, because God set up the world in such a way that he desires our prayers. So what about resurrection of the dead? So the Gemara and Brachot, Mazkirin Gevurot Geshamim, my timer, why do we mention rain in the second blessing of the Amidah? Amar Rav Yosef, Mitoch Sheshkulat Ketchiat Hametim. Because rainfall is equivalent to the resurrection of the dead. Lefikach Kavua B'Tchiat Hametim. Therefore, they included mention of God as the rain god in the blessing that's fundamentally about the resurrection of the dead. So the second blessing of Gevurot, according to the Gemara Brachot, is really primarily about resurrection. Gemara Shabbat, here's an example of resurrection and rain going together. This is at Mount Sinai. The Jews are receiving the Torah. Amar Yeshua ben Levi, Kol dibur v'dibur shiatza mi HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yastan nishmatan shel Yisrael. Every time God spoke one of the words of the Ten Commandments, the souls of the Jewish people left their bodies. Shneimai nafshi yatza b'dabro, as it says, my soul left when you spoke. And that's why the people said, so dibur might mean words, or might mean of the Ten Commandments, and that's why after the first two commandments, the people said to Moshe, enough, we can't listen to God anymore. You tell us the Ten Commandments. Okay, after the first one, they died. If they died after the first of the Ten Commandments, how could they get the second of the Ten Commandments? So the Gemara says that God brought the dew that is going to resurrect the dead, and he brought them back to life. Shneimar geshem ledavot tanif Elohim nachalatcha v'nil'a ata konanta. Whatever it says, God poured down a bountiful rain when your inheritance was weary, you sustained it. So I don't want the rest of that Gemara there. So we find that dew and rain, right, Morit Hatal or Mashiv Morit HaGeshem, are connected to resurrection physically, that God will use dew to bring the dead back to life. Gemara in Tanit compares what's better, a day of rain or a day of the resurrection of the dead. Amro Bahu Gadol Yom HaGeshamim Etchiat Hametim. The day when it rains is greater, is a greater sign of God's greatness. How many times can I use the word great in the sentence? Is a better sign of God's greatness than the day of the resurrection of the dead. Because the resurrection of the dead is only for the righteous. But rain, that's for the wicked and the righteous. So for God to do a miracle for the righteous, no biggie. They deserve it. But for God to give rain to the wicked, that shows God's true strength, true Gevurah, to overcome Kiviyachol, his own inclination and his own justice system to provide rain for those who don't deserve. Well, Fligid Rav Yosef and Rav Abahu disagrees with Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yosef, because Rav Yosef says, Mitoch sheshkula kitchiat hametim, kavor b'tchiat hametim. He says that the rain is equivalent to resurrection of the dead, and that's why it's in that blessing. So Rav Abahu says that rain is greater than the resurrection, and Rav Yosef says it's equivalent to. Either way, there's a connection between rain and resurrection. And here's just one example of one of the rabbis praying for rain, and we'll talk more about rain, as I said, when we get to Birkat HaShanim. Rabbi Gazat Hanita V'Lata Mitra. So Rabbi, it was a drought. Rabbi Huda Nasi decreed a fast, and the rain did not come. Nachi Kame Ilfa. So they came, asked Ilfa to lead the service. Now, go and look up who Ilfa was, because Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan decided to stop. Is that right? decided they couldn't afford to stay in yeshiva, they couldn't sustain themselves, they should go and get a job. And Ilfa went and got a job. Rabbi Yochanan came back to the yeshiva, and Ilfa is somebody who remained righteous despite leaving the yeshiva world and despite not being Rabbi Yochanan. So nothing on me. Ilfa, like Ilfi, others say it wasn't Ilfa, it was Ilfi. Amar, he said, Mashifa Ruach. He prayed, let the wind blow. Unashav Zika, and the wind blew. Morida Geshem, bring the rain. Va'ata Mitra, and the rain fell. So that's pretty impressive that the words, he says the words and the actions happen. Amalei Rebbe says to Ilfa, my avadach, what is your merit? What do you do that gives you the ability to make it rain? Amalei says, Diana Bekusta Dachika. I live in a small, poor city, delayed by Chamar Lekidusha Havdalah, and there's not wine. People can't afford wine for Kiddush and Havdalah. Tarachna Omaitina Chamra Lekidusha Vavdalta. So I make it my job. I exert myself to bring wine for Kiddush and Havdalah, and allow them to do their mitzvah, to fulfill their obligation. And so, in that merit, he was able to, because he cared for others, because he allowed others to do the mitzvah. So his prayers were extra special, powerful. Yerushalmi talks about. I think I should give a whole shir, at least one, or series on Eliyahu Hanavi. But my reading of Eliyahu Hanavi, he pops up in the Book of Kings, and the first thing he does is he says there's not going to be any more rain. He creates this drought, and the next 2 or 3 chapters are God trying to convince Eliyahu to let it rain. That God has given the keys of rain to Eliyahu, and God is now trying to convince Eliyahu to make it rain. So first, he sends him off to the desert, and he's starving, and he provides him with food from the ravens. Then he sends him to Tzarfat, to the woman, a woman and her son who have nothing, and he lives with them for a couple of years, and then he goes off to fight against the prophets of Baal, and then he goes. Everything God does is trying to get Eliyahu to change his mind and allow the rain to fall. So when he's in Tzarfat, this woman who's looking after him, her son dies, and Eliyahu brings the boy back to life. The Midrash says that boy went on to become Yonah Hanavi, the prophet Jonah. So why did God make this kid die and come back to life? This is what God said to Eliyahu. Lech vater nidra shel tal. Go and undo your vow, banning, saying there's not going to be any dew. She'ena metim chayim ela b'tlalim. Because the dead are only going to come back to life with the special resurrection dew. Vani mechayet b'na shel tzarfatit. And then I can allow you to bring the son of the Tzarfatit woman back to life. So that whole episode of death and resurrection was only to teach Eliyahu a lesson that you have to allow the dew, the rain. How do we know that the dead only come back to life with the dew? So the verse in Isaiah says your dead will come back to life through the dew. So we see the strong connection between the idea of dew/rain and resurrection of the dead, which I want to return to. But first I'm going to talk about the resurrection of the dead, why that's important. And I mean, obviously, we all know it is. Look how central it is to the blessing. Look how many times we have resurrection in this bracha of Gevurot. Once. Rav lo shir, Moriyatal, Shibrach. Mechalka chaim b'chesed, mechayim etim brachim b'rim. You bring the dead back to life. That's true. Samech lofim fe'yocholim atiras rim, mekayim emunatah lishnei afar. You will keep your faith to those who sleep in the dust. 3. Micha mocha bal gvoshim midar melach melech, meitu mechay. You kill and you bring back to life. A 4th mention. Matzmiach shov v'ne'emana atah lachayot metim. Resurrect the dead. Baruch atah Hashem mechayim etim. We end the blessing with resurrection. So this is a blessing about resurrection. This is fundamental. It might be the 13th of the 13 principles, but it's front and center in the beginning of the Amidah. Bereshit Rabbah says, this Yaakov wrestles with the angel, right, and before he encounters his brother Esav, and the angel says, let me go, because dawn has arisen. K'tiv chadashim labakarim rabba emunatecha, says in Eicha, new in the morning, how great is your faith? This is why we say Modani, right? Right. So we say, right, you should not say B'chemla Rabbah with great kindness, but Rabba Emunatecha, because that's what the verse says. Your faith is great. Amr Shon Bar Abba, Al She'ata Mechadshenu B'chol Boker, because you bring us back to life every morning. At night we die, and in the morning we come back to life. So we know from this that we have great faith in you, or your faith is great to bring back, to resurrect the dead. So this is how fundamental resurrection is to Judaism. We're now in the season of saying Pirkei Avot, and before we say Pirkei Avot, we say Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek le'olam haba, she'emah v'amech kolam tzadikim le'olam yishu eretz v'natzeh matai ma'aseh yadei le'itpa'er, and we stop there. But the actual full Mishnah that we're quoting continues, right? So all Jews have a portion in the world to come. I'm not going to go to fine. All Jews have a portion of the world to come. And then the Mishnah continues, but these people don't have a share in the world to come. Somebody who says there is no resurrection of the dead written in the Torah, or Torah is not from heaven, or a heretic. And there's a few more people on the list as well, but I'll stop there. So according to this Mishnah, the prime way of losing a share in the world to come is to deny the resurrection of the dead, or specifically deny that the resurrection of the dead is written in the Torah. And so that's why in the principles of faith, which are taken from a commentary on Rambam's commentary on the Mishnah in Sanhedrin, the 13th principle, I believe with perfect faith that there will be a revival of the dead at the time when it shall please the Creator, blessed be his name, and his mention shall be exalted forever and ever. And if we think of Yigdal, which is also the 13 principles, right, we say as the last line there, I can't remember what we say, but I'm sure we say something about Mechei Meitim. Meitim Yechael, B'rov Chazdo, God will bring the dead back to life with his great kindness. So it's one of the 13 principles and fundamental. Rambam says that in his commentary on this last chapter of Sanhedrin. He wrote this in Arabic, which is why I'm just putting the English here because I don't speak Arabic. The resurrection of the dead is one of the cardinal doctrines of the law of Moses. He who does not believe in this has no religion and no bond with the Jewish faith. But it is the reward of the righteous only. As shown by the statement in Bereshit Rabbah, the great benefits of the reign are for both the righteous and the wicked, but the resurrection of the dead applies to the righteous only. And forsooth, how shall the evildoers live after death, seeing that they were dead even in life? As the sages said, the wicked are called dead even during their lives, but the good are called living even after their death. And know that man is bound to die and become dissolved into his component parts. So Rambam lists resurrection of the dead as one of the, again, the 13 principles come from this commentary of Rambam. I've put it back to front intentionally. So the Ani Ma'amin comes from here. And in Halacha, Rambam lists the people who don't have a share in the world to come. And Hilchot Shuvah, Elohen she'en lehem chelek l'olam haba. The following people do not have a share in the world to come. They are cut off and lost and judged for their great wickedness and their sins forever and ever. Who are they? Haminim v'apikosim v'kofrim b'Torah. Now, Rambam goes on to explain there's 3 different kinds of people called minim, 3 kinds of apikosim, 3 kinds of kofrim b'Torah, who deny the Torah, v'akofrim b'tchiat hametim, or b'viat hagoel, and those who denied the resurrection of the dead or the coming of the Messiah. Fine. So this is a fundamental principle and a halacha. So it makes sense that it's in the Siddur, but it doesn't necessarily make sense that it's number 2. Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva, I just put this in because it tickles me that the Ravid says what he's going to say on the next slide. So Rambam in Hilchot Tshuva is talking about the reward and punishment. In the world to come, there's no body, no physicality, just the souls of the righteous without a body, like the angels. And since there's no physical body, there's no eating and no drinking in the world to come. None of the physical things we need in this world. And nothing happens to the body that happens in the physical world. Like sitting, standing, sleeping, dying, sadness, happiness. All of those are physical. Souls don't have any of those things. Ra'avad, Rav Avram ben David II in Provence says on Rambam here, right? Rambam says Alam haba ein bokuf. Omer Avram divrei ha'ish hazeh ba'enai krovim lemi shomer ein tchiat hametim legufot el nishamot bilvad. The words of this man are close to, in my eyes, to someone who says that the resurrection is not a physical resurrection, but only for the souls. B'chai roshi, by the hair of my head, or by the life of my head. Lo hayat chazal al zeh. This was not the opinion of the rabbis. Shari amru ketuvot atitin tzadikim she'amdu b'levusheihen, because they say that in the future the righteous will stand up with their clothes on, clearly physical. It's a argument a fortiori from wheat. We'll see hopefully soon. They would command their children, don't bury me in white clothes and not in black clothes. Shema is care. Maybe I'll get up in the future with the resurrection. Maybe I won't be righteous enough to wear white clothes and I'll be embarrassed if I'm in white. Maybe I won't be wicked enough to wear black clothes. I'll be embarrassed in black. So don't put me in black or white. V'chein amru, and it says in Sanhedrin, Shalot yeshuvu tzadikim la'afar ela omdim b'gviyatam. It says the righteous will not return to dust, but they will stand up in their physical bodies. V'chein amru b'mumam omdim umitrapim. It also says in Sanhedrin they will stand up with their illnesses, with their blemishes, whatever they had in life, and then they will be healed. V'chol elu mochichim ki b'gviyatam hen omdim chayim. All of these prove that the resurrection is going to be a physical resurrection with the physical bodies. Maybe God will make those physical bodies stronger and more healthy, like the physical bodies of angels. Or like the body of Eliyahu and Navi. Elijah went off into heaven, right, on a chariot in his physical body, but clearly he was somehow not physical at that point. And we talk about them wearing crowns. That's going to be literal crowns, not metaphor, not a parable, literal crowns. So Rambam, who writes in his commentary on the Mishnah and in Mishnah Torah that somebody who doesn't believe in the resurrection does not have a portion of the world to come, along comes Ravid a few years later and says, Rambam, you don't believe in the world to come. So anyway, so why is this? Why the strong connection between rain and resurrection, and why is resurrection the second blessing in the Amidah? I get it; should be one of the blessings. Fine, okay, but why is it so front and center? So I wonder if the Amidah was compiled by the men of the Great Assembly, which is approximately, give or take 100 years, the time that the other sects arose, including the Sadducees, who didn't believe in resurrection of the dead. So I wonder if the rabbis who wrote the Amidah, compiled the Amidah, made it so important to show, hey, we're not them. We're different than those guys. And Hertz says something along the same lines. He awakes the dead to new life. This emphatic statement concerning the resurrection was directed against the Samaritans and later against the worldlings. I don't know what worldlings mean. I have no idea what he meant by that, but that's what he used. Who disputed the deathlessness of the soul, its return to God, and its continued separate existence after its reunion with the divine source of being. So he suggests that maybe this bracha is here because of the tzdukim. Now, as I said, it's the season to read Pirkei Avot. So let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about Antigonus, Ish Socho, Antigonus, a man who lived in Socho. Now, Antigonus Ish Socho is probably for us the most famous Antigonus in the world, but on the global stage, he's even the second most famous or best known Antigonus, because he's named for a Greek general who actually became king of the Greek Empire after Alexander, who's called Antigonus the One-Eyed. He was a huge physical, like tall, white man, and he lost one eye in battle, so he became called Antigonus the One-Eyed. And so I think, even though nowadays Antigonus is not a common name amongst Jews, unlike Alexander, which is a common name amongst Jews, Antigonus, I think, his name shows signs of the Greek culture infiltrating Judaism. He's the earliest person with a Greek name, and shows the culture wars that were happening at that time. Now, if I had written the Mishnah, I would have called him Antigonus with two eyes to distinguish him from Antigonus the One-Eyed. But anyway, Antigonus Ish Socho. And he received this tradition from Shemoneh Tzaddik, and he said, don't be like servants who serve the master in order to get a reward. Be like servants who work for the master, not in order to get a prize. And may the fear of heaven be upon you. Now that sounds fine to us nowadays. We're used to this idea. We don't expect reward. We don't do a mitzvah and then expect a reward and punishment immediately. We laugh if somebody says, if I'm sinning, let lightning strike me down. We don't. That's not how the world works. We don't see direct cause and effect of reward and punishment. So that's what Antigonus says. Don't be like that. Don't look for direct consequences. But actually, what Antigonus is saying is really contradicting the Torah. We read in Bechukot at the end of Vayikra, if you keep the mitzvot and the Torah, I'll give you rain at the right time. The ground will provide its produce, etc., etc. So the Torah seems to say, do the mitzvot and get the reward. Along comes Antigonus and says, do the mitzvot, but don't expect any reward. That's like a shift. I don't know if my touch is my camera. I lost my camera. Hang on. I got the wrong camera now. How do I fix that? Why did that camera become untied? It's frustrating. That camera. Okay, good. Sorry. So Antigonus seems to be going against what it says in the Torah, changing what it says in the Torah. It's not only in Vayikra. We find other verses. When you come into the land, right, it's a land of mountains and valleys, you'll have rain. Chara, that's in Devarim. Also in Devarim, Hashem b'chem, God will get angry with you. He will stop the heavens. There won't be rain. The ground won't give its produce. And also, God will make the rain like dust. And in Isaiah it continues, Ki kasher yirat hageshem v'ashelag min hashamayim v'shama lo yashuv ki im haravayit haaretz. It will rain, and that will provide for the land. All these times, all talking about reward and punishment. We have an Amos Gamanochim min ati mechemet hageshem. I will prevent the rain. Ba'od shashach hashiv, etc., etc. In Eov ki l'shelek yomahu eretz v'geshem mata. In Divrayam b'hatzah shamayim v'lo yeh mata ki yechtu lecha. I will stop the heavens, there won't be rain because they sinned to you. And they will pray and confess their sins. So the Torah, the whole Bible, seems full of mentions of rain coming as a reward for good behavior, for doing mitzvot, and a lack of rain as punishment for not doing mitzvot. And what it doesn't say in the Torah is Olam Haba, Tchiat HaMeitim, right? Resurrection of the dead. I don't want to be a heretic, but fundamentally, there's nowhere in the Torah. Ramban says the Torah is full of mitzvot that we're supposed to do, not things that are supposed to happen afterwards. We don't care about the future. Fundamentally, the Torah does connect reward and punishment. It sounds though we are supposed to do the mitzvot in order to get the reward. And along comes Antigonus and says, no, you're supposed to do the mitzvot without any expectation of reward. And his students, so this is Avot Rabbi Natan, which is the probably 8th, 9th century, time of the Gaonim. It's a commentary on Pirkei Avot. Seems to have nothing at all to do with Rabbi Natan, as far as I can tell. He's not mentioned specifically in it. Also, he's not mentioned anywhere in Pirkei Avot. Interestingly, his name of all the, well, there's many rabbis mentioned in Pirkei Avot. Rabbi Natan's name is not mentioned there at all. So maybe they named Avot Rabbi Natan as a way of restoring his name to the book. If you look at the end of Horeot, there's a story of Rabbi Yehuda Nassi's father, Shemoneh ben Gamliel, and Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Meir rebelled against Shemoneh ben Gamliel, and they got punished. So maybe Rabbi Yehuda didn't include Rabbi Natan in Pirkei Avot, kind of in deference to its father, and maybe the author of Rabbi Natan put his name back somehow to make up for that. Anyway, here's the Antigonus Ishtacha Yulo Shnei Talmidim. Antigonus had two students. Shehu shonim b'dvarav, hayu shonim l'talmidim l'talmideihim. They would learn from Antigonus, and then they would go and teach the classes. They would go and teach everybody else, and those students they taught would then teach the other people. They were the promulgators, the proponents, no, the propagators of Antigonus's Torah. Amdu v'diktaku acharehen. By the way, this is the only statement Antigonus makes anywhere in the Talmud. We don't have any other words from Antigonus except this idea of not serving God in hope of reward and fear of heaven. Nothing else about Antigonus. Anyway, so they're teaching this idea, and diktu acharehen, they start thinking about what he said. Amru maro avotenu lama davar zeh. Why did our ancestors say this? If he's teaching us the Torah from Sinai, why did they say this idea that we're not going to get a reward? If Shasi yaseh poel melacha kol yom v'lo yitol scharo aravit, would a worker work all day long and not want to get paid in the evening when he's finished working? If our ancestors would have known there was another world, a world to come, and there was a resurrection of the dead, they wouldn't have said that to work without expectation of reward. So they got up and they abandoned the Torah. They got up and abandoned the Torah because they thought Antigonus was saying there is no Olam Haba. And as a result of this, there were two sects that came out in opposition to Judaism, Tzedukim or Baitusim. One is called Sadducees, one called Baituses. Tzedukim Hashem Tzadok, Baitusim Hashem Baitus, both named after their founders. They were a bit like Epicurus. They would use gold and silver dishes all their days. Not because they were so proud that they had to use gold and silver because they were so fancy. right? The Tzdukim would say that there's a tradition amongst the Prushim, amongst the rabbis, the Pharisees, Shein Mitzarin Atzmam Ba'olam Hazeh, that they cause themselves pain in Olam Hazeh, or Ba'olam Haba Ein Lem Klum, and in Olam Haba there's nothing. So let's enjoy Olam Hazeh in the best way possible. So Antigonus, who changes the simple meaning of the Torah from do the mitzvot and the rain will come, to what he meant was do the mitzvot and get rewarded in Tchiyat HaMeitim. And what his students understood was do the mitzvot and you get nothing at all. So the fight, and then the Tzdukim ended up not believing in the Torah Shebaal Peh, only the Torah Shebaal Peh. They only believed in the written law. I think the written law they believed in was they believed when it says in the Torah it's going to rain, that it's going to rain. And it doesn't say in the Torah about resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in resurrection of the dead. That's what the fight was all about. And that's why the Mishnah Sanhedrin says, if I go back to the Mishnah Sanhedrin, you have to believe in Tchiyat HaMeitim. You have to blah, 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 right? Who has no, these ones don't have a share in the world to come. In the Torah. If you say there's no Tchiyat HaMeitim written in the Torah, that's the Sadducees. That's not written in the Torah, there's no Tchiyat HaMeitim. Because honestly, it's not written in the Torah. And here, look at how hard the Gemara has to try and find evidence that it is written in the Torah. So examples, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Menayin Tchiyat HaMeitim in the Torah. Rabbi Yochanan says, where in the Torah does it say Tchiyat HaMeitim? He says, Shneimar v'natatem mimeno et trumat Hashem la'aron HaKohen. They're in the desert, and Moshe is teaching the people, when you go to Israel and you plant the land, you'll take out truma from the crops and you'll give them to Aaron. What do you mean? Aaron dies before they even get to Israel. So how can Moshe say they're going to give truma to Aharon? So it must be that Aaron is going to come back to life, and the Jews are going to give him truma in the future. From here we learn that there is going to be a resurrection of the dead in the Torah. It's alluded to in the Torah. I can see why the Tzdukim were not convinced by this. As opposed to all the explicit verses that talk about rain, they weren't convinced by this kind of trick of finding Aaron here. And similarly, Tanya Risimai Omer, Menayin Tchiyat HaMeitim in the Torah, Shneimar v'gam hakimoti et briti itam, lated lehem et eretz Canaan. God says to Moses, I'm going to keep my brit with the patriarchs, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to give them the land of Canaan. Lachem lo ne'emar, it doesn't say to give it to you, and alehem to give it to them, right? But they're dead. This proves then there's going to be a resurrection of the dead, so that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov can inherit the land. Similarly, Shalu Romim et Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, Menayin shekadosh baruch hu mechei meitim. The Romans asked Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, that's Rabbi Yeshua. Where do we know that God is going to bring back the dead to life? And how do we know that God knows the future? I can answer both questions with one verse. God said to Moshe, Hincha shochevim avotecha v'kam. Now, I love how they just moved the comma here. God says to Moses, you're going to sleep with your ancestors. And then the rest of it, and the people are going to rise up and rebel against God. But Rabbi Yeshua learns that you're going to sleep with your fathers, v'kam, and you're going to get up again. So that's resurrection of the dead. And the Romans didn't fully believe that, whatever. Anyway. Tanya Rabbi Lezer, Rabbi Yossi, but Yafti Sifrei Minim. Rabbi Yossi says, this is how I proved that the minim is a catch-all word because of the senses, but here it means the Tzdukim possibly. Right, I've proved them the forgery. They say there is no Tchiyat HaMeitim is not written in the Torah. I said to them, you forged your books, your Torah, and it didn't help you. Because you say there's no resurrection of the dead. The verse in Bamidbar says the soul will be cut off, it will bear its iniquity. So that means it's going to be cut off in this world. Avon haba will bear its iniquity. When is that going to be? Is that not for the world to come? I just quoted this one because I love the fact that Cleopatra is in the Talmud. I'm not sure which queen Cleopatra, but it could be the Cleopatra of Julius Caesar. Probably Red Mare is too late for that Cleopatra. Anyway, still nice that she's in here. Shala Cleopatra Malktad Rabbi Meir. Cleopatra asked Rabbi Meir, Amri Yadana Dechai Shchivi. She said, I know that the dead are going to come back to life. Dichtiv Be'atzisu Meir Ke'esav Haaretz. It says they'll rise like the grass. Elekshin Omdin Aromim or Belevushehen Omdim. But when they get up, when the dead arise, they're going to get up naked or with their clothes on. Amalak Kol V'chol Mechita. So Rabbi Meir says we can make a priori argument from wheat. Machitashnik Bra Aroma Yetzer B'kama Levushin. Wheat you bury just a seed which has no clothes on it, but it comes up a whole dressed in many layers and covers. So they kimshnik b'rei belevushein, the righteous are buried with their clothes. Alacha kama kama. How much more so are they going to get up with their clothes on? So why do we have the resurrection of the dead so closely connected with rain, and why is that the second blessing of the Amidah? I would like to suggest that at the time they were writing the prayers of the Amidah, the Shemoneh Esrei, at the time of Antigonus Ish Socho, or just before him, they were transforming Judaism or they were highlighting a different facet of the old tradition, which is instead of doing mitzvot so that it rains, do mitzvot for future reward in Olam Haba and resurrection of the dead. And that was the split then between the rabbis, the Prushim, and the Tzdukim, about whether the purpose of mitzvot was for Olam Hazeh or for Olam Haba. And so the rabbis wrote, when they wrote the Amidah, they put this front and center, this blessing, that it's the same thing, that we talk about rain and we talk about resurrection of the dead, because both are forms of reward for doing mitzvot. And God does bring the rain. God is the God of nature. But fundamentally, our belief isn't a belief in Tchiyat HaMeitim, not in a reward in the here and now, but in a reward in the future. I just want to end with Rav Dessler, Michtam Eliyahu, who talks about this verse. I find that this is a beautiful idea. So on the Siddur Mekayim, Imonatol Lishenei Afar, God keeps his faith to those who sleep in the dust. Yeshenei Afar Baruchniot him. It says Rav Dessler, this is talking about people who are sleeping in the dust spiritually. These are not the tzaddikim. These are people who aren't doing anything. They've got no merit for resurrection. Even if God would pour on all the extra rachamim, the mercy, they still don't deserve to come back to life. But because they're connected to the promise to the whole nation, since they are still connected, they have the thread that connects them to the nation, to the whole, right? Then they will still come back to life. So because of that, God is going to bring them back to life in the future. The Shenei Afar, not the people who are dead now. They're the people who are alive now, but as if they're dead. And God is going to bring them back to life as well. Tchiyat Eila Hi HaKasher Biyoter. Bringing back tzaddikim, says Rav Dessler, that's easy for God. But bringing back the people who are not the tzaddikim, who don't have the merit, who are only there because the nation as a whole, because Jews are going to come back to life, that's the most difficult. V'hu Gevurot, that is the ultimate in Gevurot, in strength, in might, and that's what we're praying for when we say the Amidah. We're praying not for ourselves, but we're praying to God, who is going to be faithful to restore all of us as a nation, bring us back in the future in Tchiyat HaMeitim. Please God, may we all merit to see that speedily in our days, along with the return of all the hostages and the end of all the fighting. Thank you very much. See you next week.
Rabbi Sedley?
Yes.
Rabbi Sedley? 2 weeks ago, I asked you